Thank you very much. Hi, everyone. I'll start by introducing our speaker for today. It's a great pleasure. So Thilo Rehren is the Leventis Professor for Archaeological Sciences at the Science and Technology in Archaeology and Cultural Research Center at the Cyprus Institute in Nicosia since 2017. Before this, Thilo studied earth sciences and material science in Germany, followed by postdoctoral research at the universities of Oxford and Bochum, until his professorship in archaeological science at University College London in 1999. Thilo is well known for his love for glass and glassy phases, his wide research focus covering continents, cultures, and millennia across the globe, his unfailing commitment to his students and colleagues, and of course, for his love for the color blue. Thilo has had a long and impactful journey in archaeological science, starting in the 80s, really. We have to say that. It's okay, I hope. Starting already in the 80s.
Last millennium.
Over a period since then that has seen the coming, and maybe going, of several technological advances in archaeological science that have kept changing the archaeometry landscape, and we still see this today with emerging technologies. As part of the celebrations for the 50th anniversary of the Society for Archaeological Sciences, we are truly grateful to Thilo, who has kindly accepted our invitation to share with us his thoughts on technologies that support archaeometry. Before I welcome Thilo on the stage, I would also like to thank our sponsor who makes this presentation, this focus lecture possible, which is EAG Eurofins Laboratories, who have really kindly helped us host Thilo here. And with that, Thilo, please come and share your thoughts on technologies.
Thank you very much, Vana, for that very kind introduction, and thank you for being here and devoting some of your time for my ramblings coming forth. Vana mentioned already my students. I think there are at least 8 of you here today, and I'm using the opportunity to dedicate whatever I have achieved to actually being challenged by my students, who I hope will go on and do great things well beyond what I could ever achieve. So thank you for keeping me on my toes and keeping me young as ever, however long that will take. So the title is a little bit, general. Let me first introduce briefly the Cyprus Institute, because it's not one of the established big places known like some of the provincial universities in Britain, right and left of London. The Cyprus Institute is a research institute, postgraduate research institute with its own degree awarding power, but it's not a university. It's dedicated to all sorts of relevant archaeological engineering research, high performance computing and solar energy, but also to science and technology in archaeology. And I think it's geographically very well positioned to work in a hotspot area of where a lot of archaeological science research traditionally has been based. But I also would like to point out already now that that is a far too narrow focus. The globe is much, much bigger than what I'm showing here on this map. But at least I wanted to introduce that tiny speck of land in the Eastern Mediterranean as a dedication worth going to, not just as a tourist. Anyway, talking about technology supporting archaeometry, well, it's not technology that does things. It's actually people doing things, both today and in the past. And we should remember that whatever we are interested in is not material science, I say as a material scientist. It should be the people behind those technologies. So the focus very much has to be on researchers supporting, practicing archaeometry. Now, does archaeometry as a discipline need actually support? Are we a hospital case, a basket case? I don't think so. And looking around here, I'm pretty sure we don't need support. Sorry, Pedro. I think we do need a lot of support. What role does technology play within archaeometry? Quite a lot, obviously. And what other support structures are there and are needed for a healthy discipline of archaeometry? Now, what is an academic discipline actually? There are several key criteria to define what makes a distinct field of research within its own structures. You need a taught canon of practice and orthodoxy, how to do things, standard operating procedures, which is important so that actually data fits with each other and matches and can connect and build and not just be a beautiful fragment in isolated space. And that's already where we hit a problem. How many taught postgraduate courses are there to teach actually archaeometry, not just as an exotic, interesting, minor subject area of interest for a typically white-haired professor at the end of their career, but as something which is institutionalized, where you accumulate structured knowledge in a way that it can be passed on. So that we need specialized journals, agreed terminologies to ensure that flow of information, that flow of data, and topical conferences with dedicated coffee breaks where you can actually engage with each other, professional organizations to underpin all of that. And yes, I am a lifetime member of the SAS, have been for some time, so I encourage everybody else to do that. And looking around, this conference again shows how healthy the subject is. And looking at the publication history of our dedicated journals, of which there's at least a handful, if not two, we are in a pretty good shape. Now, this is a study I did relatively recently for the 50th anniversary of JAS, but the principal underlying phenomena trend is the same for archaeometry, is the same for archaeological, anthropological sciences, and the other related journals. What you see is over the last 50 years, initially a steady output of 30, 40 papers per year published within JAS. Archaeometry had around 20, 30 per year for the first 20 years of its existence. And then around the 1990s, it takes off. And then around 2000, it really explodes. And colleagues have pointed out to me there is a good correlation between the research frameworks of the European Union and the increase in archaeometry research. And you see here how it got out of hand with 400 published papers in JAS in whatever that was, 2013, 2014, which means around 1,000, more than 1,000 submitted papers. You just can't handle that volume of papers, so therefore they split out JAS report, the red line, which then kept growing, and JAS itself stepped consciously down in terms of throughput of papers to be published. So far, so good. But let's look a little bit more into the detail. What actually is the object of our research? It's global, except maybe Antarctica. Archaeological science happens everywhere. well, happens? Does it really happen everywhere? Or does it look at everywhere? That's an important difference. Because who actually does this research? You, obviously, and I'm very happy for that, don't get me wrong, but you are not enough. If you look at how many cultures were there over how many centuries, how much detail, we need 1,000 times as many people as we are to do any justice to it. But it's not just quantity that lacks. It's a very significant bias which I think we need to address, a geographical bias. Now, archaeology, you can treat it as a commodity, as any other commodity, oil or food, grain. It grows, it's been done in some places, it's globally distributed very unevenly. It's a not renewable resource. There's a lot of cross-border trade, whether it's a commercial trade or an academic movement. It's pretty volatile. Some areas go up in interest, some areas are less accessible. And as such, it is subject to factors and forces that are not always entirely benign. Let's look a bit more closely which countries are strong in archaeological science. So I've looked at journal archaeological science output over the last 50 years, roughly 6,000 papers altogether. I was looking at the country of affiliation of the first author of these papers. Doesn't matter the nationality of these people, just the affiliation, because that's obviously what I could access, not their passports. And then looking at the country of study. So they were working in the affiliation country, looking at material, structures, phenomena from another country, or the same country, of course. It's been published, so if you want to look into it, if you want to critique it, feel free. First, the interesting news, archaeometry as a journal, as a discipline was born, I think, in Britain. And we see that green line here, the first JAS papers for the first few years, heavily dominated by UK-based authors. After a few years, it calibrated, and the Americans, the North Americans, came in quite strongly. What I find interesting is that after a bulge in the late 1990s, the US component is declining, parallel with the UK component, while Europe, the blue line, is clearly growing up. These are percentages, not absolute numbers. What I find deeply irritating is that dotted red line, the rest of the world. They contribute not even 20% of authors. So institutions in the rest of the world, outside UK, US, and Europe, contribute not even 20% of the output that we see in this journal. The red line at the bottom is also an interesting one. We will come back to that in a minute. If you look a bit more closely, in an ideal world, you could argue you have each country sitting on that straight line where you have papers dedicated to that country on the x-axis versus authors based in those countries on the y-axis. They should about equal. That would be what I think a fair distribution. Doesn't mean that anybody has to work in their own country. I don't want that. But there should be a kind of a balance as to how much archaeology does a country provide and how much archaeological research happens in that country. We see that in terms of quantitative output, US and UK are still very much leading. Spain is a very active country. Italy, China, France, Israel, RSA are both strong in terms of being the subject, the object of research, and actually delivering that research. If you look at Egypt, there already we have a problem, very clearly. Egypt is an exciting country to work on, I know that, I'm part of the problem, but very few Egyptian-based authors are actually doing that on the level to be published, and that is another discussion, why they are not being published in the big journals, but that would take too long to explore. I just want to flag it up. If you look at here, sorry, going back, every dot here is below the line, which means people are not all papers in that country are done by people in that country. Now, that means other people from other countries work in those countries. So Spain, we have 310 papers on Spain, but we only have 250 Spanish authors. Where are the other 60 authors based? And that is what this graph shows. USA, UK, they very intensively work in other countries than their own. Yes, the French as well, the Canadians, whatever is covered there, can't read it at the moment. Spain itself, Belgium, interestingly. So there is, you see where the concentration happens. And here you see where there's a significant gap. So it's a very uneven distribution, and I think that is a problem that we need to address. So going back to this, most recently, China, you see that rise here, and we see it also in this conference. It's massive and impressive, and it shows what can be done within a few years with some significant investment. All good then? We have a very active field, very widespread, but no, I think, yes, we have these key issues are more or less in place, except for that first line, as I mentioned earlier. But as a discipline, we are still marginal. We still have not the critical mass in the university system to recreate, reproduce ourselves. We constantly need to justify if one of us retires, why would that department refill that position with an archaeometric focus? What is the value we can add to that department? And if you are in a mainstream physics, geology, whatever department, it's a lost battle far too often. And then my collection of samples goes out of the window. My experience fades away slowly but surely. I may be an emeritus, still passing on some words of wisdom, but come on, that can't be the basis of developing future research. The other thing, change of subject, that I think we need to address quite clearly is that balance between the big picture research and the big ticket research. The big ticket research, that's the one that gets you a paper in Nature or Science, that gets you into the newspapers. Big laboratory, massive investment, has found a Roman nail consists of pure iron. Sorry, didn't want to make any bad jokes here. But it's one-offs. They can be exciting. They are important to stimulate interest in the general public. They are important to make sure that public funding continues being dedicated to this. And I know that CERN, for instance, is very happily accommodating for free any of our research because it exactly gives you that sort of positive exposure. But can that be a sustainable basis for archaeological science research? I don't think so. If we want to understand past societies, we need to look at the big picture consisting of millions of individual data points. We are in Turin, right? What is the most important material culture item here? Let's say that shroud. Archaeometry laboratory has analyzed, yes, we can discuss that in a different one. But if you only focus on the shroud here, is that representative of the city of Turin and its history and its people? No Fiat, no Mussolini, no nothing, no architecture. Come on. And past societies were as important and complex as modern societies. And to understand the past, we need to look at the 99.9% of the people in the past who were not buried in rich tombs. So we need to look much more at these big picture research consisting of millions of tiny data points, accumulating case studies, have a long-term vision and expertise which goes well beyond what an individual old man can do. We need the opportunity to learn from experience of those studies and get better in what we are doing. Not after 5 years, somebody else starts from scratch again. So yes, there is value and importance in both. It's attractive. And I, some 10 years ago, spoke to Heather Lechman in MIT, and they very happily use archaeological material science as an attractor, as an exciting subject to bring in students into the department. Once they have trapped them, they pass them on to mainstream material science, and they become fantastic researchers there. Mission accomplished. And some really good archaeological material science research gets done along the way as well. Or, as I mentioned, CERN, any synchrotron, offering you beam time very happily for free, because they get the benefit of the public reception, and we get the benefit of the public visibility. But it doesn't generate the critical mass that we need for proper studies. We need these working horses. And it's not shit. It's real fertilizer that fertilizes the soil on which our culture grows, on which we can then feed our curiosity and understand where we are coming from. Another axe I have to grind is that hyper-specialization that we have within our discipline. If I try to speak to an environmental archaeobotanist, I have no idea what they are talking about. And if I talk about my beloved crucibles, they very quickly glaze over their eyes. We need to better understand how things in the past were connected. We cannot look at any society just with a single focus. So we need to move from those isolated, deep focus to a much more society-level driven research across the disciplines. We need to share data, we need to structure data generation around shared interests, shared questions. And we should actually look at what mattered to those people in the past, to understand their agency, their actions, their interests. They couldn't care less what isotopic structure their ceramic pot had. They were interested in the functionality of it. So cookingware studies are very, very well justified, even though they don't use laser ablation or whatever. So let's keep the focus on the people who actually matter in the past. Thank you very much again for having me here. These societies, as you see now, are essential to keep us all talking and integrated, but also to act as an outward-facing organization where public policy people can actually listen and get advice if they ever so are inclined. We should also look more into the community journals. I know I have been working for Elsevier for a long time. I'm part of the problem. But really, looking into the profit margin of academic publishing, whether it's Springer, Elsevier, Wiley, it's in the range of 30 to 35% profit on turnover. That kind of profit you make at Tesla, you used to, in weapons trade, in narcotics, but that's about it. Human trafficking as well. So it's not the best company to be in. And more importantly, it sucks the lifeblood out of academia. So community journals were the origin actually of academic publishing, and I think they should play a bigger role in its future as well. Where do the companies fit in here? Just a few thoughts. Method development is basic research, and that's what a lot of heavily funded and big, interesting research laboratories do. They explore physics, chemistry, whatever, and look for what new things can we do, what phenomena, what effects can we exploit. And often that results in a new method, but looking for a problem. There are lots of new, exciting methods out there, but not for me, sorry. But I have a question. And then we need, say, direct dating of inorganic materials. Yes, there is exciting work on ceramics, rehydroxylation. There's some stuff with obsidian you can do. Metals, okay, if you have gold and helium, you can do something. But generally, how do we date these fantastic materials directly? So we have a bit of a mismatch between demand for methods and offering of methods. And that is where I think some of the companies that we have seen outside, and advertising break, feel free to visit their stands, end of advertising break. They are important because they are on that interface between academic research, method development, and they have a clear incentive to actually deliver and develop something that is actually needed, because they operate in a different economic environment from, say, CERN or the others. So there's one line here, and that is what we need to look at carefully as a discipline to advance. Companies as innovators, they have their own leading role to play, and I think we should encourage them a bit more and not just trust public funding alone, but it's all part of the same, eventually, ecosystem. You cannot just play one card. You need to have a range. The question is more of the balance. And that evolutionary technology, yes, technology has evolved over the years. We have had a lot of pressure concerning non-invasive analysis, very rightly driven by all that cultural heritage demand and interest. On the other hand, we have a feedback, interestingly enough, from that cultural heritage-driven research back into mainstream chemistry and physics. I think both Mark Pollard and Ernst Pernitzka have heavily commented on how the very earliest chemical analyses 250 years ago were done actually on Roman coins, because they were an exotic something, and that helped develop analytical chemistry. So a lot of the weird and wonderful constraints that we operate in terms of can't touch it, can't lick it, can't break it, and still want to know everything about it, with that tiny 5 micrograms of mass, those challenges drive innovation analytically, methodologically, for the benefit of the mainstream as well. So we have a lot of evolution here, but on the other hand, Does anybody know Optimus and Tesla and all of that discussion? I think we have now realized that trying to recreate what we can do ourselves anyway is not necessarily what we should try. We should try to expand beyond and something different to what we as humans can do. Our own creativity and eyeballing, observation, interpretation, creativity, I hope we will maintain the edge on that for a while to go. So, again, stay here after this talk. There's an hour worth of fantastic case studies along those lines, what new developments can be done, how you can push the boundaries of being subtle in terms of your sampling or totally non-invasive, and how you're actually developing methodologies based on real problems, real questions. Beyond that, I think we really need to look into that whole fairness debate further than we do at the moment. Yes, it's great that the European Union requires fairness of all its data, but what good is data if it's open but not really matching? How interoperable? How do we practically deliver interoperability even within a single subdiscipline of archaeometry, let alone across the different subdisciplines? That is an ongoing battle where I hope that in 5-10 years we will be much happier. So that whole interdisciplinarity within archaeometry is a big issue, and that's where I like this ISA conference so much, because you get exposed to everything, and as Patrick mentioned on the first day, it's by design that there are no parallel sessions here, but that you are invited to listen to everything that's on offer. As I mentioned earlier, I'm very fond of the idea that we should actually not worry about, but be interested in what people in the past were seeing, doing, interested in. Look at their viewpoints, their concerns, to understand them. Yes, a crucible is a fascinating material to study. I have spent half of my career on that. But who were actually using those crucibles, and what did they understand? What were their interests? Why did they do things the way they did it? That really brings us to be archaeological material scientists. Yes, and we need to work on that whole discipline recognition and structures. Yes, I mentioned that red dotted line bumbling along around the 20% mark. I know that if you look at beyond these key journals, if you look at the actual what happens on the ground, there's so much more happening. It's just not making its way to these journals. Whether it's not being submitted or whether it's not being accepted, and why not, is a different discussion. Again, I don't have that much time here, but we need to work on those challenges and opportunities. Archaeological science, as I said, is a commodity. Yes, you have an oil-rich country that if that country exports the oil to be refined elsewhere, the value-added processing happens outside the country. The country gets $100 for a barrel of oil, but at the end, a Swiss pharmaceutical company sells 5 grams of whatever medicine made from that for a few $1,000s. That whole value adding in the processing, in the interpretation, in the working of that archaeological material, who owns that? There's that horrible link, well, historically at least horrible, between the former colonial countries dominating the research on the past, the pre-colonial past, typically of their former colonies. Who owns that pre-colonial past? Who should research that? Who should set the agenda for research in those countries? Where are all these authors from these countries? Blanca, I see you, but they're not enough here. And there's so much happening both in the past and in the present here. The technologies that created that material culture that we are so interested in, if we look at actually the crafting of the beautiful things, not just the beauty itself, all due respect, but if we look beyond the object to who made it, why were they made that way, and so on. And I think the Monday's keynote lecture we had with the Vatican Coffin Project very nicely showed the potential that is in that approach, but also the importance of long-term research, of stable funded research. You can't do that within a 2-year postdoc or 3-year postdoc project. You really need a time horizon, maybe not as long as that of the Vatican, which is a bit very deep time, but still you need a long vision to do serious research and to look at the people behind these objects. Archaeometry, as I mentioned earlier, is highly innovative. It pushes the boundaries because of the inherent constraints that we are facing. It sits on that fault line between the STEM subjects and the arts and humanities. It should be question-driven, applied, trying to answer those questions, but it has that nice feedback loop. Now, that CP Snow here, yeah, I thought there's a nicer picture to show the two cultures as a symbol of complementarity and overlap and so on. We have a huge potential in using established methods to answer new questions. Archaeometry today may be way too highly specialized in some incarnations. That fragmentation is not helpful. We need technologies that are overarchingly applicable, that generate data that is more complementary to each other, complementary, to see a past society a bit more in its holistic coherence and not just a single bit here. High and low technologies, yes. What is more important? A session in a synchrotron or in a neutron imaging of a Roman iron nail? Yes, it's fantastic. But the thin section with an ordinary petrographic microscope with a €5 preparation cost can tell you quite a lot as well. We do need both. But that working horse approach is, I believe, more fundamental if we want to make progress. I mentioned earlier, it's too often overlooked, but we need that soil on which all of us grow. And like the soil out there, growing the wheat and the maize and everything we eat, and we don't care enough for the soil and let it wash away. So, coming slowly but surely to the end here, I think we have that dichotomy of technologies. Today, we need them to understand the past, but they are part of the past. And I would argue they are, on many levels, a more important part of the past than the high-end single object, that tiny tip of the iceberg of a culture which was highly stratified and could afford a fantastic artisan doing that unique object that is in the museum when 99.9% of the people were just living. But they are people as well. Archaeometry is global, and it should be practiced globally, much, much more than it is. We need, I think, to create structures in the South that enables and empowers people from those countries to do their own research in a way that is relevant for them, not necessarily following what we traditionally do here with our old viewpoints. And we need to unify our data much more so that we get the full rainbow picture, that all together, all these colors create a reality, and that all together, I think, is what we need. If one department gets shut down somewhere, nobody complains. Well, a few people complain. Sheffield's gone, sorry. But we need to stand up and protect each other, and that we can only do if we are recognized as an important contribution to society overall. And that reality has so many facets to it. It's cultural heritage, it's archaeometry, it's archaeological science, it's conservation, it shoots everywhere, both for the past society in the past, so archaeological science research to understand those past people, in the present, cultural heritage, what do we actually do with what we have inherited in our museums, in our standing architecture? How do we valorize that inherited heritage material? And also, how do we preserve it, conserve it for the future? We have to deal with these three time slices, the past, the present, and the future. So there's quite a lot to do, and it all is closely related, obviously. We need to be aware of the biases we have in our own head. Webb telescope, one of the more expensive and exciting pieces of research. Yes, you can do fantastic things with it, but you only see what you are looking for. This is the Earth. If you look from the side where the Pacific is shown to you. And if you only see that, okay, come on, what's happening there? A blue dot in the sky. It's the same Earth, just from a different viewpoint. So much more going on. If we keep looking only at what we are used to looking, the safe bet, yes, I know what roughly to expect in my research, so I do a bit more, and I know I get a good result, fine. But we should also challenge ourselves to look around the corner and look at the other side. We need to improve disciplinary coherence. We need to strengthen our institutional embedding and identity. We do need to own up to the diversity and complexity both of the past and of the present. Prioritize capacity building in the global South. I think that is really the main message that over the last several years I've become to realize. It's not good if I, at UCL, teach students from around the globe, literally, and then they stay in Britain, they stay in Europe. Or if they go back in their country, they have no laboratory to work with. And they have been indoctrinated by me how to do things, which was okay for me, but how relevant is that in their context? We need to enable equitable global cooperation. We need to understand who owns the past, which is a highly political topic, obviously, but we need to live with the realities of politics. We need to build first and then strengthen those non-Northern institutions to enable that research elsewhere and to develop and evolve in its own trajectories. We have to build an all-inclusive dinner table. It's not a buffet where we as a rich North come and cherry pick what we like and say that is important in our view. No, it's an everybody's owned dinner table. So on that happy note, I would like to thank again and acknowledge all those people who have enabled this, friends and students of mine, organizers, the SAS and all the other organizations that help us structure and grow together, the European Union, Horizon Europe, Marie Curie, all of those funding streams, massively important. Personally, I thank the A.G. Leventis Foundation for enabling me to work in Cyprus. And I also want to thank everybody worldwide for having been here in the last 5,000, 10,000 years and still being here, and hopefully for many more happy years to come. Thank you.
Thilo, thank you so much. Thought-provoking as always. May I suggest we keep picking Thilo's brain for the rest of the week and we'll move on with the schedule because Evdokia will be very happy about this. But thank you very much again.
My pleasure.